The organizers of the conference just informed me the afternoon discussion will begin at 1:30. So. His Holiness, our Kumuhula, and the articulator of an authentic Islamic voice, have offered us insightful observations on and personal knowledge of local identity in the global community. It is a rare opportunity for us all to hear their reflection and guidance for creating peace in the 21st century. Indeed, in this increasingly fragmented, confrontational, and litigious society of ours, it has been a precious moment to encounter three significantly different but yet complementary perspectives informed by compassion, understanding, and spiritual force. Their embodied thinking on some of the most controversial and even explosive issues of our times evokes a feeling of togetherness and a sense of hope, despite the critical awareness and the anguish, of course, that so many cultural values that we cherish and forms of life that we treasure have been marginalized and even destroyed. Of course, marginalized and destroyed by the hegemonic discourses pervasive in China, the United States, the West, and the world at large. In recent decades, we learned from the environmentalists, the feminists, the religious pluralists, that the human species, as the most violent inhabitant of nature, is itself an endangered species. The question is whether human beings are viable becomes a critical issue for further exploration. That the kind of Faustian drive to control and conquer, of course a metaphor for aggressive male domination or male chauvinism, is no longer tolerable at home, in the workplace, in school, government, in the public sphere, and that religious fundamentalism, especially the aggressive kind, an attempt to monopolize paths of salvation by a narrow-minded, dogmatic conception of human spirituality, is really a serious threat to world peace. A number of religious leaders have remarked, if there's no peace among religions, it's very difficult for us to imagine peace for the world as a whole. Our spiritual leaders this morning articulated their concern from the depth of their wisdom and sensitivity. They have offered us much food for thought. A central problem in the contemporary world emerged from their discussions is the perceived and actually deeply felt conflict between global consciousness on the one hand and local awareness on the other. His Holiness and Dr. Muzaffar continuously refer to the idea of one humanity, a sense of togetherness, a sense of the global village. Pua also points out that the search for roots, the importance of ethnicity, of language, of the sense of land, of the sense of basic belief, of our society, our history, of our culture is absolutely critical. We know that the world is getting smaller, but as it shrinks, it does not become more integrated. What we observe in the global village of ours is not necessarily harmony, even though it's always a cherished view, or lokahi, a sense of unity through understanding, but difference, differentiation, and outright discrimination. And the human condition is such, especially informed by their reflections, we do not have an either-or choice. We cannot forsake of our roots and say we go global. We become just universal, abstract universal human beings. Nor can we afford simply to be situated in our own locality like a cocoon, hopefully that some real meaning of life is being preserved. And the only option that is open to us is to search for both and. How can we be both global and local? Which is, of course, the challenge that is presented to us, and they've offered all kinds of fascinating observations about them. My own sense is that the modern West, informed by the Enlightenment mentality, even though the term is not used, but it's very much the background of the discussions, has been the most powerful and transformative ideology in human history for the last 200 years, some say 500 years. If we look around ourselves, the spheres of interest that shape our existential world here and now, the market economy, democratic polity, science, technology, mass communication, multinational corporations, research universities, and even bureaucracies at all levels, what Max Weber called forms of rationalization, characterize our modern world anywhere, in Boston, New York, Tokyo, even in Lhasa, in Hawaii, in Bali. And some of the underlying values of the so-called modernizing process or enlightenment, such as liberty, equality, human rights, privacy, dignity, independence and autonomy of the individual, and due process of law, are universal values many of us cherish. Sometimes, ironically, I don't find that many powerful, passionate defenders of these values, either in Cambridge, Massachusetts, or Berkeley, California, but they're in New Delhi, in Beijing, in Taipei, in Tokyo. However, the West is not the embodiment of enlightenment as we understand it. The West is also the embodiment, modern West, of the Faustian, Promethean drive to conquer, to overcome. We never undermines the strength, both the spiritual and secular strength of that, but we should also be critical aware of the destructive power of that force. When Bacon talked about knowledge, not as wisdom, but as power, and even the image, he deliberately cultivated an image, that our ability to rape nature, to force her to reveal the secrets. And even in Marx's idea of the humanization of nature, what we have there is really the total subjugation of nature for human consumption. So what is emerged in this mentality will be stated as His Holiness's view, and it's very much Pua's argument, and certainly Dr. Masafa's observation, that what's emerged in this particular kind of mentality, it's called modernistic mentality or even postmodern mentality, is on the surface the mechanization or even quantification of our life world, but at the same time, a kind of anthropocentrism, scientism, not science or technology, but scientism or superstition about the power of science that has overwhelmed many spiritual voices all over the world. Take the example of China. In 1974, during the Cultural Revolutionary period, China sent a delegation to the first international conference on the environment in Stockholm. The Chinese delegation is the only delegation that refused to sign the preamble. The preamble was a statement about the limits of growth, They accepted also the limits of science and technology, and they refused it. This particular secular humanism, dominant ideology, believing that the brave new world is among us, is upon us, there's no need for us to heed ever attentively spiritual forces that for centuries have shaped the human condition. You don't have to listen anymore to Buddhism, to Taoism, certainly not to the so-called primitive religious ideas. You don't have to listen to your own traditions, either in the Christian or the Judeo or Islamic traditions, because now in the modern period, we have the human capacity to transform the world and design. That arrogance has been extremely costly. And here we have the authentic voices of saying no to that particular process. We need to explore the spiritual resources of the human community as a whole, including the resources in the West, the kind of Christianity that would not be considered as an ethic for the spirit of capitalism, the kind of Christianity that takes the dominion over the world as the stewardship rather than as control, manipulation. Many non-Western civilizations, I'm always intrigued by the fact that Islam has been sort of typed as the radical otherness. And yet, without Islam or Islamic contribution, it's difficult to imagine the development of Renaissance or the Reform, because it's part of the tradition that contributed to the rise of communism. We take into consideration of the Islamic traditions, of Hindu traditions, Buddhist traditions, Confucian and Taoist traditions, the so-called non-Western spiritual traditions. There are all kinds of resources that could be explored and generated for thinking about the human condition. In addition, of course, who are reminded us there are all indigenous religious traditions, not just Hawaiian, but Native American, Maori, and other traditions. These rich resources will have to be refigured, reappreciated, and represented. The environmentalists, the feminists, and the religious pluralists, together with our spiritual leaders, have helped us to understand what normally some political scientists simply call the politics of recognition. Everybody wants to be recognized, to be part of this game for power and wealth, is in fact a spiritual quest for personal self-understanding, for communal participation, and for human flourishing, broadly defined. The image I have about true authenticity to its own roots, one's own roots, ethnicity, gender, territoriality, language, basic religious orientation, and globalization, is the image which is in the Sufi tradition of Islam of digging a well. You are absolutely serious about your own ground of existence without leaving it, and you dig deeply into it so you reach the common spring of communication. You don't forsake your primordial ties. You honor them, but honor them in such a way you recognize every human being has the right to honor their own primordial ties. They are different from yours. Therefore, the pluralistic spirit has to be recognized as a way of human flourishing. And that digging eventually will reach different levels of communication. That communication will evoke powerful spiritual forces from many traditions. Therefore, on the surface, we're very different and recognize that difference. But that recognition is not simply to tolerate difference, to be superficially recognize pluralism. We dig deeply into our own ground existence for the sake of true communication. It is in this particular kind of spirit, I think it's rather remarkable that a discussion on local identity and the global community as a spiritual project with, of course, far-reaching political implications should not be simply politicized as if it is only the politics of recognition. For example, if I want to be a true Confucian, it is a process of learning that involves attainment, involves the appreciation of history, of literature, of thought, certainly of language. That's true with trying to be a Hawaiian, a Tibetan, a Muslim, And that process of learning, which is learning of culture, is not at all in conflict with our willingness to take part in the global community, which hopefully will be enriched by many different currents of thought and different ideas. Thank you. Now we are moving into the final movement, the segment of our meeting today. And I think the game plan is to ask a series of questions already prepared by you. And since a number of scholars have been kind to read some of the questions first and try to coordinate them. So we have certain kind of order, but we want to make it flexible so we'll be able to accommodate many other observations as well. But this meeting will adjourn probably at 3, and we're certainly going to have enough time for the 3 distinguished panelists to make the final observations, 5 or 10 minutes they see fit. But we would like to begin with the question and answer period. And most of the questions, or quite a few of the questions, addressed to His Holiness expectedly. And I would read the questions, and so answer where you see fit. And there are other questions that we raised, and I will ask the other 2 panelists to join in as well. But I think it's also a good idea that questions that are addressed to His Holiness may have repercussions for other contributions, and so the other panelists are invited to respond to them as well. One question is straightforward. How would you transform the negativity, the negative forces in the world? Magic? How would you transform the negativity? Negative.
I think from the Buddhist viewpoint, there can be, I think, the external negativities, well, external nature or some the internal nature. So first, I think in order to challenge the external negativities or confront the outside the negative forces, I think the important or appropriate method is first try to transform from within. So then I consider the within internal sort of negative forces. Of course, I think from the viewpoint of different philosophy or different spiritual tradition, there can be, I think, a variety, or there can be different identities of that. Maribena, same nangabena nandole, and a chulu to limit to one gig, Rikashegi, the Gansia, Kashan, Daniel Shayu, Sigris.
It is also possible that given differences in one's own belief systems, that certain modes of thinking and certain forces of mind which may be considered negative in one tradition may be considered not so negative in another tradition. So such diversity of opinion might also be possible. For example, strictly speaking, from the Buddhist point of view, the notion of an independent agent existing as a unitary, eternal subject, as a soul, something abiding within the person, is considered to be, in fact, a source of a lot of suffering and miseries.
choose narrative knowledge.
And which may not be the case from the point of view of other religious traditions.
But then I think they probably, I think the all major world religions, I think, if they all consider something negative forces or evil forces, I think that is the hatred or jealousy, or these things are considered as a negative. Then, without involvement about religious faith, I think they, as a human being, and even I think the person who very much concerned about one's own health, from that viewpoint also, you see, these mental factor is the negative forces, negative element. So, without any religious faith, I think we can make clear presentation. We can make clear presentation. Within our mind, there are some negative element or negative thought, which very harmful for one's own health, besides daily mental peace. So this I think we can transform through reasoning or through I think through thinking.
How can nonviolent resistance succeed against violent regression?
That's a difficult. I think at least you see some cases, or I think some cases, I would say the strict non-violent method may not effective. For example, usually you say, I feel like it's the Second World War or the Korean War. Perhaps I think they inspired a lot of destructions and suffering, at least some, I think, was a positive result, I believe. Now, at least, like, for example, to Korea, because of the war, at least the part of Korea remain a free country, now today much more prosperity. At that time, if not, that would stop by force. Today maybe it's a situation I think entirely different. But then generally I always believe the violence is I believe against the human nature. Of course, aggressive nature also part of human nature. But you see, my basic fundamental belief is basic human nature is gentleness, more compassionate. So therefore, through non-violence, although the achievement may not 100% satisfactory or may take longer period, but once you achieve that thing, that is the genuine achievement. So generally, I believe the non-violent method is much more healthier, right? Much more sound and much more effective for long run. That's my belief.
If you could speak to the political leaders of China, what would you like to say to them?
I think first I would like to tell them, please study more about Tibetan culture. You see, your reason is, I feel, the conflict, in this conflict, I feel one major factor is ignorance due to lack of knowledge. So then very difficult to communicate with them. And on top of that ignorance, the communist ideology. There's some kind of within their brain, some kind of bamboo curtain is there. So, very difficult to penetrate in it.
This is a question for Alani. you recommend that we find out, quote, who we are. But many peoples, including many Hawaiians, are of mixed racial, cultural, and spiritual heritage. Who are they supposed to identify with? For them, the idea or the identification has to be on a more universal level, transcending local culture.
The person that asked the question, are you Hawaiian? No, you're not Hawaiian?
Maybe related to this question, so today there are many non-Hawaiians living in Hawaii, and most Hawaiians are not 100% Hawaiian ancestry. In your opinion, what is it that non-Hawaiians can do to assist or to benefit Hawaiians in the healing and empowering process and taking place in the Hawaiian community? For example, is there a place for non-Hawaiian in this process?
Okay, the reason I threw that question back out is because I think you need to be part Hawaiian to be able to answer that question for yourself. I don't have that problem because I am Hawaiian. I don't have other ethnic backgrounds or races in my family, so I don't have the problem of having to be loyal to other races. But I do have friends, and I certainly do have families who are of mixed races. And I think that I cannot answer the question for them. They need to answer the questions themselves. If they live here in Hawaii, then I think that they should have a great deal of loyalty to this land. There are, like being a Christian and being a Hawaiian, a lot of people don't understand how I can mix the two. I don't have a problem with that. Other people have a problem with that. Okay, so I cannot answer that question for them, like I cannot answer this question for those who are mixed race, because I don't know how they feel. I think that as long as they live in this country and in this land rather, and enjoy those things which are of this land, I think there should be some loyalty to being Hawaiian. But I know that they do have loyalty to being Chinese as well, or Portuguese as well. And as I said before, I've had family and friends who have done a lot of work as far as genealogical work with their Chinese background, with their Portuguese background, and that's fine. That's who they are, and that this is who I am.
Another challenging question, using Hawaii as an example, is there a way to ethnically reconcile our desire to procreate and continue our genealogies, as well as to build up the Hawaiian nation in the face of the crisis of global overpopulation?
Whose question is that? Mine?
A question of yours.
Okay. I was, prior to my going back to Hawaii to teach at the Hawaii Community College, I was teaching at Maui Community College for a number of years, and it came to the time where I thought that, no, it's time for me to go home, because whenever I would leave Maui and go home to Hawaii and see the mountains again, the Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa, to me, they're my ancestors, you know, and it gave me, it revitalized me to go back to Maui again and stay for another week and come back. And finally, when I decided, no, I'm going to go back, and I didn't have a job to go back to, one of the things that I thought that I would do is open a dating service called Antipoa's Dating Service. And Antipoa's Dating Service had to do with repopularizing our Hawaiian race.
What is your successful rate?
I don't know, I got another job, so.
This is a question for Dr. Muzaffar. How does, again, a challenging question, we only select challenging questions now. How does one reconcile the principle of compassion with the condemnation of the writer Rushdie to death for negative writing.
Thank you. Now, as far as the edict issued by the late Khomeini against Salman Rushdie is concerned, not many people would be aware that there have been a number of Muslim scholars and activists who, even at that time, in 1989, I think, stated openly that the edict was against Islam. Even if one agrees that an apostate, a person who renounces Islam, should be put to death, the procedures which have been prescribed in Islamic jurisprudence are very clear. You have to give that person a chance to defend himself or herself. And Salman Rushdie was not given that opportunity. It was just an edict issued by Rushdie, and he told the Muslim community that if someone was prepared to kill Salman Rushdie, they would be rewarded. In this world, with a hefty financial reward, and in the next world, he guaranteed them a place in heaven, which, of course, no person has the right to guarantee another person. Now, from the point of view of Islamic jurisprudence, it was wrong. From a larger perspective, the idea that an apostate should be put to death is something which has been challenged from within Islam for a long, long while. And when this particular edict was issued, Islamic scholars came out and said that within Islamic philosophy, there is no death sentence for an apostate. I myself have written an article on this. I wrote this immediately after Khomeini's edict, and I argued that it was wrong of Khomeini to have issued a death sentence, because in Islam, a person has the right to leave the religion. Islam makes it very clear that that person will have to answer for his or her decision vis-a-vis God. But no human being can issue an edict and say, look, I put you to death. It's not for us. In fact, the line in the Quran that says, this thing goes along these lines. It says there are people who go in to the faith, there are people who come out of the faith. You're not the keeper of their conscience. It is they who will have to answer for this. This is the concept. So you can see that what Khomeini did was wrong. What is sad is not enough Muslims spoke up at that time. And what is even sadder, those Muslims who spoke up, who took the other position and argued this is wrong, they were not given the same degree of coverage in the mainstream Western media as those who supported the edict against Salman Rushdie. You just take the example of Britain, where the whole thing happened. There were a number of leading scholars, including the chairman of the Mosques Committee of Britain, Dr. Zaki Badawi. He's a very well-known Egyptian Muslim scholar living in Britain. He came out openly against this. In fact, he said that as a Muslim, he disagreed completely with what Rushdie had written. It was certainly blasphemous. I myself regard it as blasphemous. It was wrong. It was foolish, many of the things that he said, because Muslims, like people in other faiths too, they have a certain view of the sacred personalities in their tradition. You don't blaspheme them in that manner. But having said that it was blasphemous, it was sacrilegious, it was wrong, Zaki Badawi said that he would defend the right of Salman Rushdie to live in his own home. And yet, this was never given much publicity in the mainstream Western media. This, I think, is part of the problem, which people in the West, especially people in the media, will have to address. If we want a better understanding of each other's religion, I think it is important to strengthen the more universal, rational, sane voices on all sides. You'll find Thank you. You'll find that in Britain, unfortunately, there is a tendency to give a lot of publicity over the BBC, for instance, to people who, in a sense, confirm the worst stereotypes about Islam. So you'll have some people who would come out breathing fire and brimstone, and they're given a lot of publicity because somehow that suits certain vested interests, because that projects Islam in a certain way. Now, this is what I think we have to overcome. Thank you.
There's another one, maybe equally challenging, on the subject of dominance. How do Muslims treat their women? Do women have their own choices, or is she dominated by the male perception of the Quran?
Thank you very much. I'm going to be bold enough to answer this question in the presence of my wife. Now, this is one area where there's been a great deal of misconception about how the Quran sees women. I wish we had more time to discuss this in depth, but let me say this at the outset, that by and large, the Quranic view of the woman is one which, without any doubt at all, supports the concept of the equality of the sexes, the rights of the female, which in fact in almost every area acknowledges the woman as a human being in the same way as the male. I'll give you a few examples, very quick examples to support this, and then I'll perhaps very quickly say why a certain misconception has developed within the Western world and also within the Muslim world. What are the evidences that support this view of the woman in the Quran? First, in all those things that relate to spirituality, there is no distinction between male and female. There are numerous verses that say that for the male and the female, if you do good, this is your reward. For the male and the female, these are your obligations. For the male and the female, these are your rights pertaining to spiritual and moral obligations. Now, when it comes to social obligations, on a variety of issues, you will find that women were given the sort of rights that no society in the 7th century had. Number one, the Quran gives the woman the right to keep her name, which means her identity on marriage, which is very, very important. That a woman retains her name. She does not take on the name of her husband. So you will find that in many Muslim societies to this day, the vast majority of women, including Western educated women, retain their maiden names. Number two, the right to inherit property, which is a very important right, provided in the Quran. One could argue perhaps that the amount given to the woman, the female child, is not equal to the amount given to the male child. It's true. But then the female child is also entitled to inheritance from sources that the male child is not entitled to, from her uncle, from others who are required to support her, from her husband when she gets married, and she keeps the share of her property. The husband has no right over it. Even when a divorce takes place, the woman retains control over it. The right to divorce, provided in the Quran. Not something that is initiated by the male alone, but something which is initiated independently by the woman. The right to work, stated clearly in the Quran, that she has the right to seek an occupation outside the home, and what she earns, unlike what the husband earns, is hers in its entirety. What the husband earns must be used by both the husband and the wife and the rest of the family. The woman has total rights over what she earns as wages outside her home. Again, yet another point, the woman has the right to equal education, as in the case of the male, without any distinction. Let me recommend a very good book written by an African American on the question of the woman and the Quran. In fact, it's called The Woman and the Quran. The author is Dr. Amina Wadud Mohsin. She teaches in a university in Virginia. Very well researched, one of the best female interpreters of the Quran, and a book that has received wide acclaim, not only within the Muslim world, but also outside the Muslim world, because it's an attempt to interpret from within without apologizing or saying, this is what the position is. Now, having said all this, it is also true that in the Quran there is polygamy. There's provision for polygamy which, without any doubt at all, a woman would be right in arguing it is against her interests. But polygamy, if you look at the Quran, the provisions pertaining to polygamy are also very lucidly stated. You just cannot take another wife. In fact, the pertinent line in the Quran goes along these lines, that after a war where there are orphans and widows, the males are told that they can take 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, and that's the maximum, provided they can do equal justice to all. And it goes on to say that doing equal justice to all is not possible. In other words, one could argue, as interpreters of the Quran have done, that this was a very clever way of limiting polygamy in a society that was polygamous, given its period, the 7th century. So it was a very intelligent way of saying, look, polygamy is not allowed. The only circumstances in which it would be allowed is when there is a war, you have orphans and you have widows, and you have to protect the rights of the widows and the orphans through multiple marriages of that sort. Now, you will notice that in a number of Muslim countries, polygamy has been banned or restricted severely. In my own country, there are restrictions on polygamy, but in Tunisia, polygamy had been banned. Turkey had banned polygamy, and Iraq at one time had banned polygamy. So there are countries that had banned polygamy. Now, you have to see this in the proper context. Now, let me very quickly, I know I've taken up a lot of time, Mr. Chairman, but because it's such a controversial issue, I beg your indulgence to just explain a little more. Now, how has this misconception come about? One, because after the initial period, after the time of the Prophet Muhammad and the early caliphs, the forces of patriarchy became very, very strong in Arab society. In that particular period, these forces were not powerful at all, so much so that some of the leading authorities vis-a-vis the life of Muhammad and the Quran were actually women, including Aisha, his wife, who played a very big role in interpreting the Quran, which meant that she had a very significant public role. And more than that, what is important is that women held positions of importance. Women held positions of tremendous significance during the first 30 or 40 years. But a lot of it changed with the onset of a very powerful Arab male patriarchy. And that lasted for centuries. And today you'll find that in many parts of the Muslim world, women are treated very badly. But again, you cannot universalize. This is what is wrong. You take my own country as an example. If you look at the role of women in public life in Malaysia, you'll be very surprised to hear this, and I'm going to shock you with this, that if you go on the basis of specific statistics, Malaysia has more women cabinet ministers than Britain. Malaysia has more women at the head of ministries and government departments than any West European country. And this is a country with a Muslim majority population. If you look at my neighbor, Indonesia, women have very prominent roles in public life, and that is the largest Muslim country in the world, mind you. You'd be very surprised if I told you that within a few years after the vote was given to women in Britain, Egypt gave the vote to women on the basis of an edict issued by the leading religious scholar of the day, that women had the right to play an equal role in public affairs on the basis of a verse in the Quran which had commended one of the greatest administrators and political leaders of their time, the Queen Bilqis, who was the contemporary of King Solomon. Her administration and leadership was commended. Women were given the vote at that time. Now, these things are not highlighted. We also forget that at the level of prime ministers today, if you look at the world as a whole, there are more Muslim women prime ministers than women prime ministers from any other religion. You have 3 women prime ministers from the Muslim community: the Prime Minister of Turkey, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, and the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Have you ever asked yourself whether it would have been possible for Muslim men and women to support Muslim women as prime ministers if it is true that the prejudice and the antagonism towards women in public role is so great in Muslim countries that somehow this would be totally intolerable? It was not. It has not been. Why? Because at the level of the populace, there is a certain understanding that they would accept the role of women. It is some religious elites who have been distorting the religion for their own interests. And what is sad is, within the West, and this is my final point, Mr. Chairman, within the West, anything, and pardon me for saying this is a very, very candid discourse, anything which puts Islam in a negative light is given a lot of prominence. And the question of women has very often been used as a stick to hit Muslim civilization as a whole. I don't think it is fair. Thank you.
Please. This is the spirit of the moment thing. Pua, would you tell us a little bit about the role of women in Hawaiian spirituality or Hawaiian culture?
Well, you know, when you look at the men and women, the men have to try harder than women. And because they have to try harder, they get more attention. Okay. Women don't have to try hard. We don't have to go through any rituals to prove that we are women. Okay. Men have to go through rituals to prove that they are men, so they get more attention. The fact that we give birth proves that we are women. And they also prove that we are the creators. So in doing that, I don't think that I need to make excuses or look at the women as being the weak point. I don't. In many of our stories and our poems about Hawaiian literature, women are always the prominent. And it is not until they get into politics that men become the more prominent. Other than that, it is the women that do the ruling, and it is the women that move along. And so, as far as in many of our stories, it is the women who are the strong as far as love is concerned, being able to love somebody, being able to show love. And it is the men who has not been very good at that, being able to maintain the love. And so in many of our stories, the men are shown as being the weaker of the two. But when you come to politics and when you come to war, then of course they're the stronger of the sex, because who wants to go to war and fight and get bruised and et cetera? I'm not being facetious, but that's, that's all I have to say about men and women.
His Holiness may choose not to answer that. But the question about women in Buddhism is being addressed.
It's quite not so slow. I think the reality, I think, a little bit is complicated, and then also you see I think the 다당 간의 캐시도 다만 그게 뭐 먹고 따서 이래 세 뭐 먹고 따서 이래 되는데 다당 소수 토하는 지샤다가 요데지.
This question of women in sort of traditional societies is such a complex issue that it also has many different angles, and also given that depending on what angle you adopt, it also tends to give sort of different results. However, the basic reality of the situation is that men cannot live without women, and women cannot live without men.
Now, in the Buddhist tradition, of course, firstly, the So not only human being, entire sentient being have the potential to become Buddha. So usually we call Buddha nature. So, and on that basis, and also I think some other reasons, is a desire for happiness, desire for overcome suffering, also it's the same. Therefore, these are the reasons, which is the conclusion is they all are equal, same, and all have the same right. Then within human being, of course, it's men, women. I think as far as right, I think essential right is concerned, the Buddha gives the same rights. The highest, I think, the ordination, that's bhikshu. So bhikshu and the bhikshuni. The Buddha gives the same equal opportunity. But at the same time, the bhikshu consider gyaloma shunuchi gyaloma demuchilia gyalompa shunuchi yandi respect macha.
At the same time, we do see certain sort of trends of discrimination or bias. For example, like even though both men and women have equal opportunities to be fully ordained, but in terms of seniority, even a junior monk, fully ordained monk, is considered to be more senior than a senior nun.
So you see, this looks some unequal. Then this is according to Vinaya rule, Vinaya system. Then the Sutriyana system,
So this is the perspective within the monastic discipline, and then there is also a certain types of literature which deals with the Buddhist path to enlightenment, where again certain sort of discriminatory attitudes are reflected. For example, the single lifetime within which the individual become fully enlightened is said to be necessarily a male form. Partly because it is implied. The implication seems to be that in the male form there is less obstacles.
Now, obstacle means that
The external, sort of less external obstacles.
Then the Tantrayana, there are four different level of Tantrayanas. Then the highest Tantrayana, which is usually called Mahanuddha Yoga Tantrayana. Now they are very clear. Thoma Wang Shivakalini, Shepat Shema, Samat Samato Tomosin, Komunijaku. Tamsu Sun Kudu Legi, Pumilia, and Yamishana, but Nivashiati, Shivuji than Nandecheva. That any Taramabas or San using it, Pumi then Degal Sanja Sheshe, that they are savage.
However, the highest standpoint of Buddhism, which is considered to be the Tantric Vajrayana standpoint, within that system, right from the beginning, which is the stage when you take full initiation, empowerment, even from that stage, and also when you observe the commitments and pledges and so on, and until the final realization of your full spiritual potential, there is all throughout the whole course of your path, there is total equality between men and women, and that represents the ultimate standpoint of Buddhism. So what we could say is that if you examine carefully what exactly is the position of Buddhism on the question of women, is that because we do see certain sort of discriminatory tendencies in some of the forms of Buddhist practices, there seems to be a very conscious, explicit attention paid to the position and role of women within the spiritual path, so much so that there are very specific practices in the Tantric Buddhism where more special attention has to be paid towards women. giving respect to them and being always mindful of according them the due respect. And so from a sort of a wider perspective, one could say that the position of men and women in Buddhism is really fundamentally equal.
One thing I would like to mention, you referred to the role of media. From time to time, when I had opportunity meeting with the press of the great group of press, the few occasions I mentioned, I believe because of human nature, when some negative things, negative event happen, such as killing or some negative things, then because basic human nature is the opposite nature, so these give human mind some surprise, shock. So it becomes news. The other thing is the positive human activities about kindness, the helping or serving. These positive things in deep our mind take for granted. So not become not news. So the newspaper or media usually they give the news. It's a big headline. So eventually, in people's mind, the newspaper or media provide our human mind many negative things, negative events. Eventually, people somehow brainwashed or affected in their mind. Then believe human nature is negative, human nature is hopeless. So that lead depression. I think that is some very important matter. So the newspaper or media, I think, better to present equal, they are balanced. There are a lot of negative things there, and also I think the human positive role also limitless. So in order to keep our determination, our hope, I think the presentation of other side also I think equally important. That I would like to mention. Thank you.
At this juncture, I would like to exercise the chair's prerogative by interjecting a very short comment of my own. And I think it's fair to say that the idea of equality, rooted in the Enlightenment and through the democratization process now universally accepted, is a new phenomenon in human history. Many great traditions, to be sure, provide resources for human flourishing for both men and women, but for various reasons, social, political, economic reasons, in the pre-modern period, invariably in the West, in the East, in historical religions, and in primal traditions, women were discriminated against, marginalized, and often their voices silenced. If we look at great spiritual traditions as streams that continue to flow when they're confronted with the challenges of the imperatives of modernity, so to speak, they will have to adjust, they will have to transform, they will have to change. I think one great contribution of His Holiness is his openness and willingness to transform Buddhism as he sees fit, in encountering with not only other major religious traditions, but also with modernity. And I'm sure this is the case with Islam and the case with Hawaiian spirituality and other traditions as well. We do have a question for His Holiness concerning the United States. I combine two questions into one. The United States is perhaps one of the most violent societies in the industrialized world. And I would like to interject, according to a recent survey, out of 100,000, per 100,000 in Japan, on a yearly basis, maybe 2.5 murders attributed to gunshot wounds. In the United States, the figure is very high, such as 575.2 per 100,000. So we are in a very violent society. Now, what message do you give to the so-called, quote, failures of our competitive Western society, let's say American society, the homeless, the unemployed, the depressed, the drug addicts? After all, their needs are so physical and fundamental to survival, and there seems to be so little relevance to many of them of spirituality. The need for survival and the need for material goods in this sense, or some economic, social, political changes, seem somehow to relegate spiritual matters to the background. And what is your advice to the situation at hand?
That's very difficult. Of course, I'm a Buddhist monk or Buddhist practitioner. So I think because of that, I always look, and then the Buddhists, I think the way of practice is the training of mind. So some people described Buddhism as the science of mind. So as my the daily practice, the training or the transformation about the mental states. So therefore, for such a person, they look various different problem. I always see the clear connection with the mental state. So generally, I believe in a society where a little bit, I think, the negligence about the internal spiritual development, then naturally, these unhappy situation, occur. Then perhaps America, in a way, is a multi-culture nation. Of course, there are positive aspects. Then I think negative aspect, perhaps, is America. Now here means the new immigration. They come from different countries. So settle in a vast land. They are, in a way, very young nation. And the generation goes, you alienated from your ancestors, long cultural heritage. And expecting some new way of life, new culture. But that also very difficult. Within 200-300 is difficult. So therefore, that also maybe is one factor. And in the meantime, a lot of facility and a lot of freedom. And then meantime, too much either very strong competitions. So these perhaps, I think, again, I must say, is my knowledge, about this nation, of course, very limited. So I think, fortunately, look, America, different places, just a few days, so consume all these positive things, not go to, the time came to just lose to see Sangurti the long chair. Can't even look and go you over.
Fortunately, most of my trips are rather short, so I tend to sort of move from one place to another place and enjoy the more positive aspects of the society, and do not have the time to really get deep into the more sort of negative or negative, the bad sides.
So in any way, my knowledge is very limited, so it's difficult to say. It's difficult to make suggestion. But overall, I do feel that kind of the feeling. So all these Western nation or the nation where the external material development highly advanced. Now in this area, naturally, I think the material development through science and technology, you can enjoy it. You can consume the result immediately. The other hand is a spiritual field. Is still compare external matter, then internal spiritual matter is still more mysterious. So you see, the people immediately is more attraction towards the external thing. So go that way, eventually neglect about internal health. Internal well-being. So that's I think one important factor. This is I believe.
This is quite sensitive, but I'll raise the question anyway. I've heard that you describe, this is to His Holiness, I've heard that you've described homosexuality as a kind of, quote, sexual misconduct. Could you clarify your statement and how much you reconcile your statement, if that's true, with the Buddhist philosophy of love, compassion, and pluralism of views and lifestyles?
Now I think in order to explain that subject, we have to make distinctions on different levels. Firstly, I think human level. Male and female, it's a sexual action is the main purpose of that thing is reproduction, right? Reproduction. So not only is it immediate satisfaction, but some longer responsibility. So male to male, female to female, will not produce that will not fulfill that purpose. So in a way, even I think the structure of this sex organs itself, very clear. Two things come together, that is very good. But same things come together, different. So that's, I think, the basic human level. So what we call the homosexual, actually I think some kind of against human nature. So that kind of natural pattern. But then another level, the people who have a religious belief. Then the self-discipline is very important. It's a matter in order to promote spiritual experiences. So many, I think quite a number of religious traditions, consider the importance of celibacy. Now here, the male to male, female to female, that considered one of sexual misconduct. Even husband and wife, using mouth, and also using the other hole, also the sexual misconduct. Even parent, even married couple, and also using one's own hand. That also is a sexual misconduct, considered sexual misconduct. And particularly in the Buddhist practice, the aim is not merely to consider the sexual action is something negative, no. But the basic aim is the control, to control attachment, desire, attachment. So the sexual the attachment involve color, right? I think right. Sukta, ti, ro, reja, ngaja lo dalim.
For example, in the case of Buddhism, it's not so much that the Buddhist attitude towards sex is that it's something bad or dirty or negative, but rather the primary aim is to reduce the force of desire and attachment, because it is seen as the source of suffering, and sexual desire embodies. It represents the sort of the most intense form of desire, where there is a desire towards form, sound, touch, and all of them are embodied, and also taste.
So, the control, that, attachment, is a very advanced sort of practice to control, to self-discipline regarding, attachment. And also, obviously, when you have more attachment, including sexual, there are the other side of the coin, love, hatred, there are also, some connection. So the practitioner's aim is to eliminate all the negative, the emotions of our mind. Right? That is the aim. So therefore, these practice involved. Now another level. A person who has no religion, then you see one particular case. Now both is the male and the female. Have some sexual relations. A few occasions, some people ask me on very let's say, how should do by these people? Although have some deep interest about Buddha Dharma, so Buddhism consider these are sexual misconduct. So meantime, their life very peaceful, very happy life with that kind of relation. Then what to do? Then and I thought, now you see particular case, now such case who have some long-term relations, and their relation remain very peaceful. So then I told such cases, I consider exceptional case. Now the murder, fighting, violence, these also is negative. And it's a sexual misconduct, also negative, wrong. But within that, compare killing, stealing, or injuring on other, and sexual misconduct. All sexual misconduct is much more non-violence. Okay. Of course, now you see the AIDS. That is, I think, one point. Otherwise, if you see two, really, satisfied and their way of life, very peaceful and very good, then I think we have to take exceptional case. That's my position. So generally, these are wrong. So better to avoid.
Thank you.
Clear.
Now we're moving from the body to body politic. This is a question for Pua. What are the hopes for the Hawaiian sovereignty movement with Hawaiians now so small a minority here?
We have a few people in the audience who are the leaders of sovereignty groups. I think they would be better at answering this question than I would. You want to answer this question?
This is addressed to you first.
Addressed to me first?
Right.
But she needs to come and answer this question as well. I believe in cycles. And we are in a cycle that we are coming full, that we're at a time in our history where we are coming full cycle. And I believe that there is a great deal of hope in becoming a sovereign entity. And I think there's a great deal of hope because we have a lot of people, Hawaiian people, who a few years ago did not believe in their ancestral spirits, or their, when I say ancestral spirit, I mean their kupunas who have gone. And we have been great believers in our ancestral spirit and the fact that our kupunas are still with us. And they still are helpful to us in our daily activities, in the kinds of things that we choose to do, in asking them for guidance. We believe that we will be guided and enlightened by them. And a few years ago, there were very, very few of us who believed in that. Today, there are more of us who believe in that and who are guided by that. And so I think with that, this other thing of the political entity has more hope than the spiritual movement did. So I have great belief that this will come about, and it's moving in that direction. Do you want to say a few words about that?
Because of the constraint of time, I would like to, at the request of Paul, maybe a short statement from someone who is really knowledgeable about this
Yes.
this issue. Yeah, please.
Right now, the Hawaiian people are 20% of the population of the state. And as Boaz said, maybe 20 years ago, people did not think that there was any hope for the cause of Hawaiian self-determination. In the last 5 years, every church in the state, Protestant and Catholic alike, has passed resolution to stand with our people in the cause of native self-determination. The Japanese Community League joined them. The National Lawyers Guild also. So although we are 20%, our commitment and our love for the land appears to be contagious. With the support of everyone in the larger community, we will achieve our goal of resurrecting in a peaceful way our nation. But we cannot do it as a minority. Already there is proof to see that those who are not Hawaiian, but who are united to us, who are part of our broader family, are supporting us. So what Pua says is great truth. Our numbers grow, but they grow with an enlightened and supporting broader community. Thank you.
We have a technical question addressed to Dr. Muzaffar, but I think it's a significant question as well. War is affected and waged in various ways, some with guns, some with food or other ways unknown to people of our world. One war is with money and central banking. How does the war with currency, with money, impact the efforts of sovereignty in the Muslim countries? What is being done to decentralize banks or central banking networks? Of course, the question here is the Federal Reserve Bank of one currency, USA, is privately owned. It's a Class 8 stockholders, old guard European banking families. If you don't feel comfortable in answering it, that's fine, but the question has been raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think I'd be able to respond to some of the technical aspects of the question. But if you are talking about the way in which fluctuations in interest rates in the North in particular impact upon the financial position of poor countries and not necessarily Muslim countries, then I think this is undoubtedly a matter of great concern. I'm sure many of us are aware that a very slight change in interest rates in the United States, for instance, could have a devastating impact upon the economies of a number of countries. And this would also be true of Japan or Germany or some of the other powerful economies. I don't have the figures just now, but I remember looking at some of these things at one time, and I was just astounded at how much it would have affected countries in the Caribbean, in sub-Saharan Africa, and so on, changes in interest rates in the north. Now, as far as certain Muslim responses are concerned, you know, there is an organization called the Organization of Islamic Countries, which has established an Islamic bank, which has also, from time to time, attempted to overcome some of the more disastrous effects of changes of this sort, but it has not succeeded. It has not succeeded for a variety of reasons, but one of the main reasons is, I think, the leading bankers, the suppliers of financial assistance to this banking system that they have established, are closely tied to the Western economies, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, countries of this sort, and this is the reason why they can't act independently. So I'm very, very doubtful if Muslim countries on their own would be able to do very much about problems of this sort. The only other response that is taking place within individual Muslim countries, not directly connected with the problem of currency fluctuations or central banks, is the attempt to popularize banking without interest rates. And Malaysia is one country where this has worked fairly well. We have in Malaysia today 2 parallel banking systems, conventional banking and a comprehensive Islamic banking system, which is not just at the level of loans and deposits, that also covers financing of international trade and all the rest of it. This is something which has been attempted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last question, I think it's addressed to all 3 panelists. Most social evil starts to be implanted in infancy through abuse in the family. It seems to stem from ignorance and insensitivity. How could we begin to reverse this perversive atrocity through education? How can we reach families worldwide? In other words, the centrality of the family in terms of social flourishing and the spiritual traditions responses to them. And why don't we again begin with Professor? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's significant, Mr. Chairman, that you're ending this symposium with a question on the family in the year of the family. This is the United Nations Year of the Family. And I would want to respond this in 2 very quick ways. Number one, there is a great need, I think, for families throughout the world to spend more time with children. This means a radical reordering, a restructuring of work patterns. This is, to my mind, one of the curses of modern society, that work outside the home has become such a burden that it has begun to impinge upon very fundamental familial relations, man and woman, mother and child, father and child, and all the rest of it. I think we'll have to give serious attention to this question of work outside the home and how it impinges upon family relations. And number 2, there is a need, it seems to me, in view of the way in which secularization has developed, for families in most parts of the world to restore some sort of moral and spiritual education within the family setting. Now, restoring moral and spiritual education does not mean going back to the old methods of conveying these ideas. I think we have to work out new, more creative methods of disseminating values like this through the family system. I don't know how this can be done, but what I'm certain about is that the old methods will not work. But nonetheless, there is a need for spiritual and moral education at the level of the family. Thank you.
Family living and caring for children is a topic that is very dear to me. And because I promote having more children, I promote having more children on the, excuse me, I promote having more children with the idea of taking care of them, of educating them, of allowing them to have their time as children. Traditionally, when we had a particular family tradition to carry on, a child was taken from the home, kept by the person who was going to pass on this tradition, and that child, for the first 8, 9 years of his life, lived under the tutelage of that particular teacher, learning as much as they could, absorbing as much as they could about that particular tradition, and after this time, cutting them loose and allowing them to become children again, and living with their family and enjoying the greater family. This is, to me, a good learning tool. I would like to see ourselves as Hawaiian be able to teach our children that also. But I would also like to see children be children, that at 4 years old, they're allowed to be 4-year-olds. And at 15-year-old, they're allowed to be 15-year-olds and not allowed to be the 40-year-old father that he would like his 15-year-old to be, because he failed throughout his time, and therefore he would like his 15-year-old to overcome the failures that he went through. We have a lot of hang-ups as parents because we have seen mistakes along the way, but the mistakes that we saw are the mistakes of that particular time. And we have to remember about how we were when we were 15-year-old and how we were when we were 8 years old and how we were thinking. I think for many of our parents, we forget how it is to be 15 or how it is to be 8 years old. And in forgetting this, we would like the 8-year-old child to act like a 25-year-old and then have good manners in the company of certain kind of people and act the way the parents react to these people. And in being insecure like that, we then become very abusive. And many parents are abusive parents because they are insecure, because they would like their children to be better, because they were not. And again, we don't have the answers for that, but we do have a way of educating the parents. I think the parents are the ones that need the love more than the child at that point. The parents need the reassurance more than the child at that point. And I started off a career with kindergarten children, and I wanted to go in that direction because I saw a lot of children come into high school and hate school. Come into high school and hate school because their teachers did not want them to be 5-year-olds. Their teacher wanted them to be older, and would not react to their questions and wanted them to react the way she wanted them to react. And so they did not allow them to be at that particular age. So I went into kindergarten because I wanted to know what 5-year-olds think. And you get so many wonderful ideas out of 5-year-olds because they're so innocent to the negative things that are going on around you. And as parents, we're very aware of negativism. Children are not, unless they're totally abused at that age. And so we can learn a lot from children. And I think that parents need to be re-educated as to when they were that particular age. And that's one of my answers. And I realize that in a lot of the third world countries, there's a lot of abuse of children where they are taking children out of the homes and being sold as prostitutes and for sexual purposes. And I think eventually, hopefully, they will get their due. The parents will get their due, or the people that are selling these children. And I don't know if we can save the whole world, but we can certainly save our neighborhood. And we can certainly save our community and go for that and be aware of what's going on in our community as far as children are concerned. Thank you.
And please go ahead. We have the final remark from His Holiness.
I think this morning, I briefly touched our sort of hope for a better future, I think much related with the present children of today. So as I mentioned earlier, I believe the happier life, whether individual level or family level or national level, the one of basic human nature, the affection. Once the affection is there, then the sense of responsibility also comes. So the key thing for me is the good heart, warm heart. Here you see when I say compassion or love and compassion, should not confuse. They usually the sense of the love regarding the sexual or some other attachment. The genuine love and compassion without attachment. Therefore, that compassion, genuine compassion, is something like unbiased, irrespective whether that person is close to you or not. So long that person passing through difficulties or lack of facility or lack of happiness, happy life. So naturally, you develop some kind of a concern, some kind of closeness feeling towards that. That's the compassion. So that I think by innate, we have that seed. And in fact, that is, I consider, the basis of our survival, basis of our life. So that, I think the most important period of cultivating that is at the beginning of life. So the parent, as I mentioned before, particularly mother, is, I think, the first important person who introduced the value of these, the human good qualities. So therefore, the family life, I really consider very, very important. So in order to have a good family, I mean the family which in the full of human affection. In order to do that, is the marriage. Marriage, I think, become important. Although I have no connection, no experience or no connection about that. But sometimes the couple, without knowing properly the other, is hurriedly married. So that marriage, actually, I think, the result of sort of mad love, sexual attraction. So that very short life. So very soon, that strong attachment, desire is gone. Then marriage becomes trouble. So although it includes that affection, that has a sexual affection there, but knowing each other, then develop some kind of respect one another, not only love, but also respect. And that develops some kind of mutual responsibility. So with this background, then that marriage will be a genuine marriage and happy marriage and will remain long last. Then, of course, occasionally some problems come from this side or that side. That's quite a human nature. But then the spirit of spirit of reconciliation or the knowledge of long-term consequences. So sometimes I think the little disagreement, I think, should sacrifice. Otherwise, it's the children of those divorced with parent. Usually, it seems very unhappy. Then eventually, the negative experience at that age, I think that remain whole their life. So the children who grown up in the atmosphere of lack of human affection, then these children, when they grown up, they also, they find it difficult to express their genuine affection to others. So the construction of happy human society, I think the education and money or these has come later, even religious faith. But the first day from the birth, I think is the moment of that day, I think because of the proper care or proper cultivation about healthy development of human being. I think very, very important. So
Please,
I agree what you said. Thank you.
please, please join me in thanking His Holiness Pua Kanahele, Chandra Mazafa, and also His Holiness Interpreter, Venerable Top 10 Chin Pa. For an excellent presentation, and to show our respect, we would ask His Holiness to depart first.
May I add one word?
Please do.
I really enjoyed this meeting or this symposium. So you say, I noticed there's many people on the face of many people. I think you have the feeling or agreement that kind of attitude. So you see this kind of work is something connection of building our society, not just academic discussion. So it is very important if you agree with some of the topics we discussed. If you agree, if you feel, please you keep some kind of sense of involvement and do something in your own family. So you see, that is the way to change our society, to transform the negative force into positive force. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the question. The question is remarkable, as you see to us.
Okay. Well, I thought the Dalai Lama was especially articulate and appropriate to our situation here in Hawaii. I think the sovereignty issue is an issue that is taking place on many fronts, and one of the fronts in which I felt was addressed here at this conference was the need to focus on our spirituality as human beings. The focus on humanity is such an appropriate topic for us to look at. And the values, the universal values of humanity, the values of nonviolence that we see happening on the international scene is something we need to bring into the movement here in Hawaii. I was particularly interested in his comments on demilitarization and his understanding of nonviolence and how we here in Hawaii need to make those kinds of issues that we face every day something that we address. I'm thinking of the missiles on Kauai, where missiles are being launched from Nohili Dunes, a sacred burial dunes for the Hawaiian people. I hope people leave this conference not just with their feet up in the clouds, but with their feet on the ground. We need to bring heaven down to earth and to address some of the issues that are happening all around us today. And it was refreshing to see people of faith, people of spirituality, putting their lives on the line, speaking out against injustice and oppression. And being here with us in Hawaii is such a strong statement of solidarity and support. And I just applaud the work that they are all involved in, and so I just feel it was a good conference, good symposium. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Conference, please. 3, 2, 1.
Go ahead. My name's Carlos Andrade. I'm a native Kauaian, and I appreciate the conference. I think it is an exceptional experience to see a man like the Dalai Lama, who is the head of a country that has been under siege and no longer has a country, come to a place like Hawaii and help those of us that are Hawaiians highlight the fact of our sovereignty, and yet as a simple man bring out some real practical ideas and infuse them with compassion and the idea of justice. And I think these are the two main ideas of the conference that I thought were important: compassion and justice, and the fact that we can all be individual and independent, and yet we can still have world, what is it called, interrelationship. We can still have a good interrelationship in the world.
Thank you.
Passing the torch.
There's two different. I don't mind. What you want? How do you want to do this, Roz? Can we move it a little bit this way, or yours?
You gotta come to us, right?
Okay.
For once,
Okay.
come with the
Okay.
Kauai.
Well, I'll do it again if you like, if it's better. Okay.
The same angle like this, you can catch it.
Okay. Well, this was a day I'll never forget. It was a deeply moving and stimulating experience to be in the presence of the Dalai Lama and to hear his teachings. And it was a very rare and special gift to have him visit us here in Hawaii. And I think it now behooves all of us to nurture that good heart within ourselves and within others, and to take that and transform ourselves and our communities and the world.
Thank you.
The symposium was very reaffirming for all of us that are doing social activist work in Hawaii, and it was also very insightful in that all three speakers, especially the Dalai Lama, were able to give us personal encouragement in the work that we're doing. And I think also some of the topics that were touched: equality for women, protection for family and human rights, civil rights issues, and as well as self-determination for indigenous peoples, all pretty essential topics for those of us living in Hawaii, especially the Kanaka Maoli, the native people. But it was very insightful, and it was very supportive, and a very enlightening and positive experience for me.
Thank you, Governor.
Hey, thank you guys.
Spark that.
Okay, then the other hand then.
Oh, all right, we're rolling.
Okay.
3, 2, 1, your name, please.
Dana Naone Hall. A number of very important things emerged from today's symposium. One thing was in which Professor Tume talked about how strong religious or great religious traditions can continue on as streams in the face of modernity. And I think that's what we're all faced with today, whether we're Hawaiians or people of the Jewish faith or Christians or Muslims. How do we adapt our particular spiritual basis to what faces us today as modern people? And you know, one of the things that struck me most was that while he was encouraging us all in our cultural identity, he was also making, I believe, very clear the fact that whatever kind of compassion and aloha comes from each of our traditions, that this compassion or aloha has to be practiced with a sense of non-attachment. In other words, it's not something that we just apply to our cultural group or our ethnic group, but it's something that we have to be able to extend to all people. And it's a very important point for all of us to practice day by day within our families and, of course, in the larger world. And will be particularly telling in the way we deal with people not of our culture and not of our ethnic background. And that's the basis of a great religion.
Thank you. Nice piece. 3, 2, 1. You guys ready? Reaction.
Okay, I was encouraged by the symposium today. One of the things that I do for work is I work with violence and anger. So to have international people be able to come and speak to us about this issue was a real good thing for me. And they're real good models. I mean, not only the Dalai Lama, but all 3 other speakers. And it's a real problem we have in our community and actually around the world. So to be able to hear people speak about this is real encouraging for me.
Or just comments? Okay. My comments about today's session is I'm very, very glad that His Holiness came to Hawaii. We have much to learn from him, and it is wonderful to hear a man in his position, both a political and a spiritual leader of Tibet, a country so pressed by China, to have such compassion for his enemies as well as compassion for others who are in similar position. I would just like to say I appreciated him being here. I loved the spirituality he brought. I felt uplifted by it. And I was amused by the differences as we went on in the afternoon, the differences between Buddhist culture and Hawaiian culture. And I hope that if he gets to see this video that I could say to him, in traditional Hawaii, we had a very free idea of sexuality. Nothing was bad and nothing was wrong and everything was celebration. And that although, like the Buddhists, we believe in reincarnation, that we are born again in our descendants, we don't like to give up desire and attachment. We celebrate it, and we hope that we stay in this lifetime for a very long time, over and over again, celebration. Thank you.
Microphone working? Thank you. The things that really impressed me today was that the Dalai Lama comes from a sense of responsibility. Where many times we hear blame being put on someone else, he takes responsibility for creating, in essence, a situation for people to grow, for his enemies to come together and listen to his point of view, not as a leader in the world sense, but a leader in religion. To have everyone have a space to be religious, even in politics, in the sense that world leaders could come together and listen to his words in front of us or anywhere, especially coming together in Hawaii, a place where it is heard, not only his words, but the Hawaiians and other religious leaders coming together here to speak their words. What a symposium, a place where we can listen to diverse ideas, but still come away with responsibility. And his final words, taking the microphone at the end and asking the people in the audience to do something. Not necessarily lay blame, but to do something, starting with your family, starting at home, starting with your community, starting with your world. That really impressed me, and I could feel his aloha at a level of universal peace. Thank you.